oh, he was murdered. So it's oh, so my name is Chevi Rabbit. And my father is Calvin Curry. My mother is Lavinia Shug Rabbit. Um, and I come from Montana First Nation. Um, I guess I grew up in a loving home and a loving community. I was very sheltered. I was privileged to grow up during a time when there was a lot of oil and gas wealth, which provided a level of comfort and opportunity to many Indigenous people during that era. Those days are gone now. So times have changed. Struggle is very apparent, and uh, but it's more nostalgic now and more of like a memory. Um, and The elders who I grew up with were Leo Cattleman. After my dad got murdered at a very when I was 1 years old, my mom. It was a big shock to the family. It was the first time anything extremely violent like that happened. So there was a lot of focus on me back then. And Leo Cattleman came in. That's married my auntie Velma Cattleman, who were pillars back then. And they also helped raise my mom as well, as my mom came in as like what go to when she helped raise help babysit like a nanny my cousins. So that's why they take her as her mom. My mom has been a nanny to a lot of my cousins, um, who are like my siblings. But and grew up with Leo Cattleman. He said I didn't know this growing up. He told my cousins, my cattleman side cousins, Rabbit Cattleman, to watch over me because he said Chevy would go through quite a bit of adversity because he had a son, a child who was also gender diverse, who also faced a lot of bullying, a lot of harassment, and that's their story to tell. But given his experiences with his child, when my dad got murdered, and it's very clear that I was LGBTQ at a very young age, um, and uh, and the family basically, well, he was like my unofficial father, I guess, figure. I had my stepdad too. I had a lot of healthy patriarch male models, like my role models, like my uncle Morris Rabbit, who's a former counselor, Melvin Rabbit, who passed away. I did a story on him actually with the Toronto Star. Um, and also so those are the ones I really gravitated towards too, because they're my uncles, and I grew up with them. There's also Walter back then, my auntie Rima Rabbit's late husband. So, but they passed on, and I find myself nowadays trying to fill that void, right? So the elders passed on. I was quite young, like in my teens and 20s when they were passing away, and I was like in that capitalistic mode, got my trust fund, trying to find a world. So I wasn't focused on elders, um, which is unfortunate because I could have really captured their knowledge. But I do my work now, and I try to I reach out to my cousins and my mom and my aunties, and I kind of piecemeal our family history together and their teachings, um, which is which I protect because I recognize there's a lot of academics who will take families' information and then refurbish it into their own thought processes, which I've noticed a lot over the years there, and then own those families' stories. So I really safeguard my family's teachings. So, and I grew up a kinship brother, Kevin Saddleback, and my stepsister, Deshina. Yeah. Oh, just 1 sec. Sorry, I'm really busy right now. Oh, sorry, I'm
Okay.
yeah.
You want me to do your
So, hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chevy. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. No, I think I went through quite a bit of oh, sorry, I got distracted. I'm renting a place here in Pinoca for while I figure out where I'm gonna stay. It's part of my housing issues. I find there's a lot going on there. I'll get into that anyways. Um, I find my positive upbringing was was good. I was the foundation of my advocacy because of that dignity and that love. I've been able to advocate for love and dignity for others, and then I know when my boundaries are crossed, and I do something about it. That's why I'm a very effective advocate, because I know what love and respect feels like because I grew up with that. Um, And the elder who I really rely on is my auntie Shirley Rabbit. She's my elder. She's has all the wisdom of my family. And my Gokam Mariah Rabbit, I turn to her a lot. And my mom, who and also my late uncle Richard Rabbit, who just passed away. We've lost a lot of our pillars of our family, so it's kind of scary seeing so much change happening, so much wisdom being lost, and so I find myself having anxiety, saying we need to gather these stories and um, encouraging my cousins to do the same thing too. Um, and I guess what else about me? Do I just ramble? I'll just ramble. I'm good at rambling. And I after I grew up in a loving home and I had 11 siblings, kinship was really good. My kinship brother is doing really well. That's his story, but he's doing really well. And when I look at his biological brothers and sisters, they're struggling. They grew up in different homes, and I find my mom did a really good, effective job on keeping us all together. My kinship brother and my stepsister, and raising us equal, which I didn't like as a kid, but as an adult now I respect that because there's we don't none of us lack love. We all feel loved, and which is really good. And they're my brothers and sisters, and I think I've been basically let's see. Basically, I grew up in that time period, and there was a lot of love. There was a lot of comfort. Those days are gone. There's still love and comfort, but there's more struggle. And going back to like my upbringing, I focused on schooling. I was bullied for being very feminine, uh, and always having friends with girls. And growing up with strong matriarchs: Velma Cattleman, Rima Rabbit, my mom Shirley Rabbit, Emma Rabbit, people who were pillars of our community. So I grew up with very strong women, and those are my community's matriarchs. And I grew up with very strong patriarchs. My Muslim Joe Rabbit. I didn't meet him because he passed away while he was on council. He spent his whole life on council. Our whole family, and usually when they're elected, they stay in there for life. Usually, lose a term here and there, but majority is just consistent. Um, there's some continuity there, but I think the patriarchs in our family have been they're good. Leo Cattleman, Melvin Rabbit, Adrian Rabbit, Randy Rabbit. Our family goes to a lot, and a lot of them are passing away. It's changing demographics, changing times, and so I don't lack culture. I grew up in culture. I was allowed to. My aunties really stuck up for me when other women from other families would marry in and have their colonial divisive um, thought processes, and my aunties would stick up for me. I can sit wherever I want during feast, tea dance. I can help with the rocks and sweat lodges, like when Leo and them were having them, and help break the food, the berries and stuff like that, and help my Goku and them pick traditional stuff. So I grew up in culture. I didn't realize how rich culture I was growing up, but I also lived in a duality. So I also had non-Indigenous family members and participated in their non-Indigenous customs, and then also the Pinocchio. It was very multicultural from a very young age, which I find is a strength because it helps me be adaptable and helps me understand people more when I can see there's differences. Because I find people who are so closed off in silos, they become very afraid and very toxic they're when they meet new information. So new information comes, I adapt, I learn, and I grow quite easy. And so I focused on my schooling. Sorry, I'm just rambling. I had a coffee. um, and I focused on my schooling uh, and graduated from Pinoca Comp, went to Red Deer College. I was curious about other cultures. I took hospitality and tourism management at Red Deer College, and I was curious to go see the world, go work in different hotels and um, travel and all that. I was very excited. But then I had an incident where a professor said I had three strikes against me. One being I was too loved, so I was naive about what she was saying was I was too naive that I would go to a world that was very divisive against my ethnic background and my gender identity. And I was so proudly, openly gay I didn't even think about it. And I had a good support system in college. And I found because I grew up in so much love and support and I didn't question anything, I assumed everybody was my friend, which kind of not wasn't kind of good because when I started meeting people that were shady or bad, I didn't have the skill set to weed them out initially. Um, but that professor made me question everything. And during that time, community in the parallel world, Musco Cheese was going through turmoil as the money was disappearing. We heard rumors growing up there, one day all the money's going to be gone, all those different things. No one really thought about it. Um, well, I was young. Why would I think about it? Those were the job of the elected people back then. But we heard rumors that it would be gone, the oil and gas wells. Me and my cousins were always kind of aware because we were told one day all of it will be gone. Because I grew up, that comfort came from a big family with a lot of trust funds. So there was a level and a very giving family. So when you got money, most times everybody's getting money. Um, so it was every year tens of like there's quite a bit of money actually back then when I think about it. And being the only person who had their license at a very young age, I had to drive all my cousins' cars and all my cousins' friends' cars legally. So it was fun driving around Escalades and down Denali's when a lot of the locals had the hand-me-down cars. So it was it's changed now, but it was really normal back then. And I remember asking my first non-Indigenous friend, when do you get your trust fund? And that was the first realization there was some privilege there, um, which was interesting because it's changed now. But I'm just gonna ramble. I have a scatterbrain. I have ADD. So uh, in Red Deer College, and Musco Cheese was going through turmoil. The money was going away. They were finding there was gangs all over TV, saying gangs, and rumors in the classes. Oh, Musco Cheese has gangs, another gang violence. And I was like sitting there listening to the conversations around me about anti-Indigenous gangs and scary Indians. And I would tell people, well, I'm Indigenous. And they're like, you're not like them. I'm like, but I grew up like there in Panoka, like in Rocky Mountain House. I grew up in the duality of different spent our summers in the Rocky Mountain House. My grandma Sarah Shug was a pillar there. I started a friendship center and got the Centennial Award from the government. But anyways, they're doing great stuff there. Um, uh, and So it made me question my reality about how I saw myself and I saw Indigenous identity. And I questioned, but I also was kind of angry in a way where they were framing Indigenous as hostile. Like I can take new information, but when the information doesn't add up, and I'm well aware that we have great people in Musqueam, we have a rich culture, and all I've ever seen was like a lot of change makers growing up, a lot of people who were fighting for our rights, fighting for oil and gas wealth, and I saw people taking the government to court, um, and advocating for the rights of Indigenous kids in care, like my grandma Sarah Shug, um, and so I questioned and I was offended. So I decided to take. I came to MCC for one semester, and then I went to U of A because it was either U of A or UBC or somewhere else that had an Indigenous content. Um, and then I went to U of A and started learning about Indigenous politics, Métis politics, and stuff like that. But I struggled. I found that I found that when I moved to a larger city and I blended in as Asian, I got lots of jobs in beauty industry, Holt Renfrew and stuff because I look Eurasian, and a lot of Eurasians like my green eyes, like my nose and my facial structure. And they said you, and this one teacher was like, if you change your last name to Lee, you'd make it in China, just on based on how you look. And so I got a lot of jobs in the beauty industry because it was basically Asian dominated at the time, so it's really interesting. So I was learning stuff, and then I got a then I after regular college, and then having that experience with the professor in front of all of the students and everybody stuck up for me there, I came to start studying about Indigenous, started trying to be an empowerment and of Indigenous um, indigeneity. And then I was assaulted for being gay in my fourth year, which then I came to this new awareness because I hadn't questioned my gender identity through all of this whole thing, except for the red ear thing. I was like, well, that's kind of rude. That's bullying. but non-issue. I didn't get hurt. It was more like awareness. The professor was like, "You're gay. You're too loved." I remember going to a dorm and right here, they're like, "Yo, you're too loved. You don't even." I didn't put a context, but now I know what they were saying. I wasn't aware that I was so different, and everybody was loving me and treating me good. That was a rare experience, I guess. But so then I got beat up for being gay, and I became an advocate. There was Michael Player, city councilor, Murray Bullitt, former police commissioner, a lot of politicians, Jonathan Dennis, Thomas Lukazik, deputy premier. All these people came to me and said it's the one time in history of this province, and the the public is given sympathy to the LGBTQ community. Um, and I was green behind my ears because I didn't I was an advocate um, for people and that extent and that so much awareness. And it was like a crash course in public advocacy and sharing my story. I got a bunch of awards, lots of accolades at the legislature different years, and really did my part and spoke at a lot of colleges, even the municipalities association of Alberta, Libraries Association. So all of like the top tier organizations, I've been at the forefront for years, and sometimes I'll do like a catch up talk to the leaders, and they change every now. It's like politics within those organizations, they change, and sometimes their organization structure goes a different way. But I started advocating, and I learned how to be an effective advocate from there. Um, and being in the media was now that I work in media, it's kind of interesting. I become everything that people things that I become everything that happens to me. Almost like I got thrust into the media and didn't know what I was doing, and then I got a lot of hate and a lot of love, um, a lot of being hunted. I can only describe it as being hunted, and for my gender identity, curiosity, and also have being a proud Indigenous person who spoke really well on TV. Everybody was curious at that time, and it was pretty scary. I think even just as scary as being assaulted when I had strangers following me around. I even had security outside my dorm, the campus, because there was a lot of interest, and it ended up being kind of scary. So I dropped out of university because of high anxiety because I couldn't go anywhere, and that experience was scary. Um, so I think that turned me into an advocate, and then I became an advocate for 12 years, and I recognized a lot of people suffer in silence, and I recognize being a victim without a voice is quite prevalent, and there's a lot of shame around it. And there was actually a lot of shame when I shared my story too, because it was for the first time I actually was like, "Oh, I'm a victim." I never saw myself as a victim up until that point, until I became a victim. I felt that was like being a proud, outspoken Indigenous person at that time. There was Ashley Collinball. She was doing really well. I was in a TV show called Back in the Day at APTN. So I was already doing really well. And working at Holt Renfrew, breaking all of the characteristics of what Indigenous people were, and really learning like what Edmonton has done to Indigenous people, because that's systemic abuse. Indigenous people in Edmonton are the way they are because, well, one, the church just has to look on the streets and they'll see the byproduct of what they did, in intergenerational trauma. Most of the Indigenous pride comes from like Indigenous oil and gas wealth, healthy family. We did the work to break into generational trauma. And I felt like despite doing all of that work, oppression, community violence still broke me and our family's attempts to, I guess, self-actualize, I guess, and break into intergenerational trauma. And I felt like there's quite a bit that happened during that time. Does that answer? I might be rambling now, so I'm just talking
No,
about sharing
no,
my.
excellent. Chevy,
Yeah.
you are fantastic.
Okay. I'm
Thank
just
you
gonna.
for
Yeah.
sharing your launch um, into the media industry and becoming a celebrity, and how you felt that, you know, fear, and then you needed protection.
Yeah.
Um,
I felt.
So
There was
what
a
was the
lot.
next phase? What was the next phase?
I think it was that fear. Now I, because I felt there was vulnerable, and the community lost its protection too. The community was going through its while I was going through my own individual response to a changing system and changing dynamics. There was also my community was going through a lot too. The money was gone. We went to a third party management, and so it was interesting coming back and being denied things that normally were given. And I was like, oh, that's different. So I was like, and it kind of like stunted a lot of us. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of people fell during those times or passed away, went through struggle. It impacted the whole community, and when that oil and gas went away and our progress slowed, I think we regressed for a few years, um, collectively, in my opinion. Um, I recognized I needed protection, I needed safety. So I became an advocate, and I found the LGBTQ community effective. And also, the media said your life is never going to be the same. So they kept me in the news cycles, also as a form of protection, because I was actively being hunted down, and I was because a proud, outspoken LGBT person making policy changes with politicians, um, was actually a threat to like hateful underbelly of Alberta. I didn't recognize at the time, but now I definitely have felt the repercussions of long-term advocacy. So now I'm in a media that had some protection because I have a voice, and also the marginalized communities are at times difficult to manage, but it's lateral violence. LGBTQ community also have lateral violence too. Sometimes the white gay men don't like that I speak on their behalf, um, and try to say you're a person of color category. I'm like, no, I'm the whole category. So I know internal dynamics there. Um, and then there's pillars and stakeholders and jockeying, and I end up just navigating that just as First Nations to have our own lateral violence issues too. But there's also organizations have different stuff. I found that very difficult because over time, as my life fluctuated, the people and groups that didn't like me definitely came in and would try to disempower, in very non-legal ways. But I don't know, it's like systemically disempowering a person of um, who's outspoken for the community. And I recognize all my events. Almost every politician in Alberta has attended my events, past and present, and I have an open door policy with quite a bit of them, and a lot of news people who have moved on to different big organizations. So I have a pool of resources of people who I turn to for advice who are facing similar challenges in their own sectors, in their own professions, in their own roles in the country. But they're just friends who I can talk to, um, and seek advice, from. And then I became a very effective advocate, and then I started being put on committees with the province, started aligning myself with, um, good politicians who do the work and recognize fast, um, window dressing politicians, and also politicians I felt were just there for a photo. And then also some who were being demonized as bad, but were not actually bad people, and they're actually good, and they're doing good for their base. And so I recognize that right away that they're just doing what they got to do too. So I have all these different diverse politicians from different backgrounds who are doing what they got to do, and they have people they have to take care of, and advocates have from different backgrounds. As long as they're not hurting people, are setting their base to come and hurt people, I'm cool with that. Uh, and Our CMP committee was very different. Um, I felt like I became a very effective minority advocate, gay advocate, trans advocate, gender diverse, self discovery advocate, and talked to a lot of politicians and a lot of organizations over the years. And then at one point, I was like, oh, another roundtable with this other new group of ministers. And I'm like, okay, we're here again. They were like, it takes time, Chevy. I'm like, yeah, but we're here. How many times do we have to be at these roundtables to discuss more? So I was getting, and they're like, they said, give Alberta credit. It's doing its best, given all the whatever. And then I was like, okay. So it was really interesting because I was like, I'm still facing harassment. I'm still going through stuff. The community's still suffering. Um, and and then I found that my advocacy became more complex, and then I felt like there was housing issues, and I felt like my when I would speak up, they were it's like I don't know how to put a name to it, but they were trying to find an angle to disempower me, whether it was trying to wreck my credibility, uh, get me fired from work, um, try and keep me in constant busyness, chaos, um, or bringing me into the wrong conversations and then trying to paint me a certain way, but had a lot of people watching out for me. Um, and then housing became an issue because there was landlords became an issue because I felt like that was it. That's how you silence. Let's make those Chevy unstable. So I started advocating for um, LGBT housing, and and then I started advocating that we need more change within the RCMP, and I joined the RCMP board, the first ever Two Spirit, an LGBT person and Indigenous person on that board. And it was actually cool because I got to give my former mentor the role because they told me, well, who do you want to fulfill? You're done your 2.5 year term. Well, 2 years, just over 2 years. Who do you want next? So I got to give it to Murray Bullitt, who's doing a really good job. So it's really cool being able to help people when as I evolve professionally and build up a team of people. Uh, and then that changed because then the people I was advocating for effectively turned on me because they had a bad relationship with the RCMP. So then I got death threats and a lot of noise around me for a few years. Well, for the first year, like a lot, which was kind of scary because the people it was they started getting mad saying anti-police and there's a lot going on. So I've always been in doing stuff, and and then that's over now. But I'm now a consultant and I have an open door policy with RCMP. But sometimes there's regional issues, so I'll just go for like the top brass. Um, and I think that's I've had to find strategies to for safety, for effectiveness, and I'm just doing my small part. And there's lots of people doing lots of different parts. So right now, housing is a big issue for the community. So got I also work with a lot of nonprofits in different ways, and I sit on a lot of advisory stuff and all over for different organizations. Um, and the government's been really cool in listening. Almost I have three different governments, and they always extend that listening. Like, what do you need? What an open door policy. Often it's really once the report's built, and um, oh, housing. Yeah, so now I'm a housing advocate. I'm going to Ottawa, advocating for. I sit on the National Women's Association for. They created a position for Two Spirit. It's the external body for that one with the housing advocate. And then I did work with them on a workplace inclusive program a few years ago on developing it for federally organizations, whatever. So this one, and then the Pan Canada Women's Housing, and I sit for LGBTQ. So it's a position specifically for LGBTQ. I'm the only Alberta representative of all of Canada. There's like the 50 top change makers for different areas of all of this province, I guess. Not province, Canada. So just helping helping people. Oh, and also advocating too. I advocated in City Council in 2021 with I got had the floor for the for city council, and I argue that Aaron Paquette, I said these are self-congratulating. You're not really helping two-spirit people. And like, where are we in this discussion? And I questioned slumlords and different issues, our vicarious housing, and then I really felt a different kind of backlash because a lot of our people utilize that housing, but sometimes they're a staging ground for behavior or exploitation. And I felt that last year. And I was talking to Edmonton Police on that not too long ago about the experiences I got of being harassed, street harassment, for speaking up for our people to have better services in these places they live in. Because some people like the status quo of disempowerment, and some people don't understand that they're being disempowered. Um, and then, so that happened. And then I have just had open conversations with politicians and organizations that adhere to CMHC housing because I've gone to Winnipeg and all these different things. And the CMAC was there. Different. It's a new director now, but and then the housing advocate got built, thanks to the Liberal Party, and basically making recommendations for entire LGBTQ on housing, and then listening to all of the service providers over the last 2 years on their experiences, and then taking their voices and amplifying it. Hope that makes sense. Oh, and I did Walk a Mile in a Ribbon Skirt, and also Hate to Hope and Gift of Warmth. And I've done over 40 campaigns, but um, two really good campaigns. Walk a Mile in a Ribbon Skirt Day is part of history, and we went. The Senate of Canada asked me and my niece to present and support the National Ribbon Skirt Day, and then Hate to Hope Day will come out next year. There's in talks right now.
Wow. How do you feel?
I feel
What
like
are
I've
the
done a lot of
challenges?
free work.
You were mentioning community violence. Tell us a little bit more. Like you use the word community violence. Where? Community violence in Massachusetts, in Montana, in Ponoka, in Edmonton,
Everywhere. I think
across
everybody
the
has their
world.
own. I think there's community violence. Like what I was rambling with. Sometimes you'll have if there's so many different narratives I'm going through. And I feel I will live in a duality. Sometimes a quad duality. I don't know how to put that, but so many different things and so many different hats. Sometimes I get little like, what am I doing now? um, but I think it's from April. Just one second. Hey April, I'll call you right back. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
April Abe's on the Premier Council, so we're just organizing Welcome on the Ribbons Girl. She's amazing too. Does such a sexual exploitation took it to Ottawa. She's a wealth of knowledge. I've built up a pool of resources of people who are doing change. We all have similar experiences of being harassed for being outspoken, and we have a lot of stuff like that. But community violence is often. Sometimes it could be regional. Sometimes I'm like, where is it coming? I was talking to RCMP here in Pinocchio, and they're like, we don't even know where sometimes it's coming from because you advocate for so much different things that and it ruffles some people's feathers. Even Pinocchio News said to me, "You're a big fish in a small pond. If you're going to ruffle feathers here."
You've used the word advocacy so many times. Give us
Yeah.
different examples of advocacy. Like one you mentioned was having this ribbon skirt day.
Yeah.
Uh,
So advocacy for me is what I found is that people have stories and people have to be ready to give. People have to be ready to share their story. And like I felt like I wasn't ready to share my story. So I give that compassion and care when I do stories. I'm like, that person isn't ready. Or I give them a pep talk about what will happen, what's possible, not to scare them, but if you're going to share your story. And also make sure they have supports and stuff like that. Or make sure I look around if they have a good support. Like, 'cause sometimes advocacy takes a lot of work. It's not just like, oh, let me share my story. No, because an effective advocate is a story, but when you get challenged by the community that doesn't want to hear an empowering story, you're able to not buckle. And you can advocate for LGBTQ, you can advocate for place in ceremony, you can advocate for place in society, you can advocate for marginalized victim collectively as allies, but it's very complex. When you do that, faith groups, you can find common ground with people. You may not be exactly like them. You may have completely different, but you share a common experience of oppression. So you'll make concessions and ally with people. And I find advocacy is just like RCMP. It was about protection of LGBTQ folks and Indigenous because I felt like there was a lot of exploitation going on and a lot of hate crimes going on in different things that were disempowering Indigenous brilliance and LGBT brilliance. So, and the RCMP, I felt like, well, that's a solid system that has a history, yeah, but they're willing to modernize. And I was part of that voice to actually the first voice to modernize it, the first initiative in Canada to ever modernize it. And it's cool that I was part of that. And then I think there's advocacy of trying to find what nonprofits are actually getting the work done because I found sometimes some organizations were hoarding resources and then favoritism within how they distribute resource, which I didn't like because it's supposed to be non-biased how you support a vulnerable person who's a vulnerable person. It's not are they what are they going to do? But there is, I guess they should if they're going to if they're going to help vulnerable people, they should have like is that an active addiction? What kind of services is that person going to have a hard time? Are they going to get to work soon? Is it just a stumble, or is it somebody who needs cradle to grave kind of support kind of nonprofit? So, I but everybody should be helped. Um, so working with nonprofits that do the work and making recommendations to government because they're like, well, what nonprofits in the city do you recommend? So, yeah, and I've been doing that for years in different ones, and this gathering from my experiences of working with so many nonprofits of what I thought was doing an effective job on helping the people I serve. Oh, and then
Thank you, Chevi,
yeah,
for sharing and for explaining what advocacy is in plain
but
language.
advocacy is basically just asking those in power, like First Nation chief and council, if they don't have their own resource, own source revenue, they're essentially an advocacy group, Native Women's Association advocacy group. So you work with big advocacy groups and you play your small part, and then you're an individual advocate, and you can, navigate the political, social, and economic landscape. But also, advocacy comes at a cost. So right now, I'm being like all these organizations are making room now for prominent advocates like April too, who are experiencing violence for being an advocate. And it gets really difficult when you're advocating for people who are going through their own oppression and they're oppressing each other and they are oppressing me and they don't realize we don't need an army because we're destroying ourselves effectively anyways on all fronts in all different groups.
Um, Thank you for Chevi sharing the real situation. I remember Bruce Cutknife once presented and a history presentation, and he was saying people kill people. When you're speaking
Yeah.
about community violence, when you so what um, how will you find stability, sanity, strength to in your work now?
I think well, taking social work because I thought I can get an indigenous holistic approach. So I thought I could be more. I can get some skills within my to be an effective advocate, and also some self-help skills along the way. I thought social work is a jack of all trades. It's any human behavior, and if I take an indigenous approach, there's some holistic approach, and then I can tie in my own resources that I do use, like family support. But sometimes they're living their lives, and they have their own obligations. So I don't want to. It's changed nowadays because in the past I can really rely on them, but nowadays I have to rely on myself. Um, and I also wider Wagotuan and community has supported. I in recent years Shirley Rabbit has been a big support for me. She gets it, and my mom always unwavering support. But she also has her obligations to our family. Has as the community is going through its own dynamics. Often it falls on the home fires and the healthy homes to do all the work. And that's why I advocate for women in our community, advocate for women off reserve, on reserve, non Indigenous, those women who are the pillars and the backbone um, of, of identity, I guess, making our identity as giving it that safe space to grow, flourish. So we have to always water and nourish our roots, the people that supported us.
So, Shavi, to do advocacy work or any community work, first is charity begins at home, or you're at your own individual level, having enough money for food, clothing, shelter, the basic necessities, roof above your head, and housing.
Yes,
Uh, so
housing,
cannot be
housing.
expected to volunteer for everyone. Uh, how do you survive when you are doing so much community work? How are you surviving?
Right now it's been a struggle, so I recused myself from a lot of boards. I said I just don't think I can do this right now. My financial situation's changing. I'm getting cut off from different things of like what I was making money from. because the advocacy had a big price, and people didn't see that it was actually people trying to fire me, people trying to get me. It felt like a witch hunt for a long time. But very insidious, and I didn't catch on right away sometimes, and I felt like I was always being pushed out. Even if I wasn't doing anything within the organization advocating, people would find out about my advocacy, and then they would want to make themselves heard, make a name off me, or get their story heard, or find a way in. They were looking for a way in. If they didn't get it, they were individually. So it was like wave after wave of people always coming at me, to a point where I just have other advocates I can no longer. I hardly trust people sometimes. I'll talk openly about stuff like this, but there's a lot of stuff, and then I realized, okay, we need more mental health support. So I became a mental health advocate, partnered with the SOAR organization. I was looking around for organizations to partner with, and then I reached out to Stonewall CEO, the CEO for Stonewall Recovery, and then I call him every now and then. So I just went there, and then other people were saying there was other organizations saying they wanted to support, but I was like, well, what kind of support? What would it be? So mental advocacy and addiction became one because I had some bad coping mechanisms, like I would drink and then to handle the stress of, well, not like if you're receiving death threats, it gets really after a while. It gets, even if you say you're tough, it does get scary. And I used to get scared for my family too. Like, what if it go? That's why you never really see them in the media with me for many years. But now they kind of we do now because I get there's been a lot of threats basically, and I played with my mental health for a long time. A lot of bullying, a lot of pettiness, and after a while that became overtaxing. And so I took 3 months off from work this year for the first time. I recused myself from um, a lot of stuff. So I only sit on two committees, um, and going to Ottawa next week. And then I say no to a lot of things now. I did the one for Coalition for Human Rights. I agreed to that. There's a lot of school systems keep on asking me to come and talk. I did agree to go talk to their Calgary group homes there. So I'll say yes every now and then, but I say no to a lot of things nowadays. Because I want to focus on school. I want to get my financial standing back in order. Because this year I really felt the struggle. And you can't be an effective advocate if all your five basic needs are always being under threatened, and people are trying to find a way to control your voice or control your add some influence as the advocacy or as the advocate has some struggles. So they look at people want want to make a I don't know how to describe that, but people want to make an influence on you, and they think, or if they find out you're doing stuff for this so and so, they want to try gather information around you for their own purposes. I don't know what that's called. So there's a lot of games people play, and lately it's been more professional. So I call it professional bullying
I think you've given it a word, professional bullying, where they have their own
agenda.
hidden or open agenda, and you are being used as a vehicle for them to achieve something. You're
Yeah.
just used as a tool,
Hmm.
or a vehicle. I don't know which word to use for them to
I
get
say,
what.
yeah. I'm like, what was that? And you're not going to check me. I was like, tell organizers if you're gonna if it's a what's the intention now? I'm like, whoa, because like there was a pride flag here, and the entrepreneurs were messaging me around here, and I felt like I was being baited into a conversation. I'm like, I came back to Pinoca to focus on school, connect with family, because whenever I am under stress, I connect to the places that were good to me. So family, community, Central Alberta here. So personally in this transition stage where I'm back as a student, still working in media, lots of opportunities, but I don't want to take them until I'm done with schooling so I can have a little bit more of a foundation to amplify my advocacy at a later date. I think I rambled. I had a lot of coffee.
No, no, excellent, excellent. Um, Words which you shared, which is not written in the books, about the challenges you faced. Um, especially the community violence, people killing people, like, this reverse, um, reverse attack. I don't know what to call it. Um, so
I think
you,
the community violence is a lot because if somebody who is in a role and they feel threatened by my voice um, or whatever, they will let me know through very non-violent, but could be violent, and often harassment and psychological bullying a lot. Um, and also physical harassment. I got was like yelled at, and it was on TV in 2017. This guy was yelling at me, Adam and Eve, and I didn't see. If I get all that kind of harassment a lot, um, like day-to-day shopping, somebody has the oh, you have access to me. Okay, now they're gonna let me know their whole life story. They're gonna let me know, and I'm like, who are you? um, so yeah,
Chevy, excellent, excellent presentation, I think. So, how do you trust people now? You mentioned you have your pools of support of people, like all different types of people in different places, and the
yeah,
connections you've made at different levels, right, from politicians to big community organizations. How do
yeah.
you
I don't like to
trust?
name. I don't like to name everybody who I support because I like some. There's some. I like to keep some stuff sacred in my life because I feel like there's always. I feel like a fish in a fishbowl at times in my life, especially during like election cycles when they're like, oh, let's publicize your identity. Where's a good spokesperson? Let's put you there and let's rattle your cage a bit. But I think I became really good at weeding out people. I do a lot of strategies to make sure I have a solid ship. And I build rapport with a lot of long-term rapport with people. And made a lot of mistakes too of like trusting people who have turned on me and were going through their own struggles and their own ego, pride, or lack of growth, and they hate that I'm growing, or people come in with false flags, um, and I think there's a so I became really open with my life too in a lot of aspects, but when it comes to my support systems, I have my support systems. I have my reservoir of people I connect with and I've stayed in contact with for a long time. So those are the kind of supports I need. And I thought if I name my supports, people will go. I feel like nowadays it's the politics is more really toxic now. So I like to keep my some aspects of my strength to myself, so people don't find a way to disempower me some more. And there's I think housing should be a right. So right now I'm fighting for housing because vulnerable communities are facing high marginalization. There's a lot of like how do people leave when they go into inclusive housing, or if that person and that organization gets a grant and it has a gender diverse lens or an indigenous lens, but yeah, it's predominantly non-indigenous people and then straight people. How did the people leave? So there's internal politics and how the hiring process, stuff like that. Um, so I raise all these different issues of like off reserve community harassment, like Indigenous people will face off reserve harassment, will be cut out from housing opportunities, rental staff, slumlords, not even slumlords, just racist landlords um, who are very nosy about everything that anybody does. They're already naturally nosy about Indigenous people. They always want to know where the resource money is being spent so that they can find a way to exploit that. So that's been ongoing for before I was born. Because the, once a First Nation leaves the reserve, and if there's any connection to the resources of that community, well, that the towns are finding a way to get it. They want it. They don't want the native. They want the money. So they'll accommodate and do whatever they're gonna do to get the money. And then so slumlords or landlords sometimes are all eyes and ears of indigenous people. I find that's why I was advocating that indigenous people should be their own landlords. They should provide housing for their own people, so then they have a level of safety, so they're not renting and being discriminated in land housing situations. And that's why if you look in the streets of Edmonton, the majority are unhoused are indigenous people. Well, they're pushed out from every from every housing opportunity. And there's a new wave of immigrant colonialism where the system, because the system hasn't reconciled itself, it's inherently racist. So no matter what flavor of people you put within the system, it's naturally already inherently racist towards indigenous people. It's just new people take on the mantle and they don't do that work. So often indigenous people are further pushed down. So housing for Indigenous people is really important because we're the largest unhoused group in Canada on our own homeland. We have nowhere else to go. We're tied to land. Our history is here, but yet we can't even get housing. So it's CMHC housing advocate. These are the people who have the policies. So that's why you have to go there and ask and say, my people are dying on the streets like that. And then they have to come up with solutions too to provide adequate housing and make sure the system actually provides housing for our people.
Excellent, Chevi. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you.
Okay.
One final question. How did you find your voice? Like, how did you become so good in articulating? Does it come from your mind or from your hearts? Your flow of words.
I don't even know. Probably both. I find if I just speak honestly, it's way more refreshing. It actually scares people who are not used. They're sneaky. They have an agenda. But when I'm very authentic, and I just keep it authentic and the intention is good, seems things seem to work out in the long run. So I think I've always had. I had actually. So back in Montana school, although I was getting bullied for being feminine, there was a teacher that bullied this family, and I noticed that right away. And it's so funny because Bruce Hinckley became our MLA, and he reminded me too that I got called in the office not because I was in trouble, but to question why the teacher was bullying that kid. And I said, we all act the same way, but it's every day. She focuses. I can see it. And that I was an advocate from a very young age. So then, and it's cool that Bruce Hinckley too, when he became an MLA, he sat down, we had meetings. He's like, I ran 13 times or whatever. So many times I've been had the NDP for so long. I'm like, yeah, if you want it, go ahead. They offered me to. Oh, and the other thread, I've been headhunted by almost every political party for 12 years. And I often said no. I because I looked at Canadian politics and I saw what they do to their people. I was like, well, that's vicious. And somehow they got me and I became an advocate and a news person. So either way, I was going to be in a cage anyways. Because like, why get elected in a cage? Um, so uh, the basically, I was an advocate for a very young age, and then I would stick up for people. And I found my voice because I was getting bullied, and I had to find ways and strategies to stick up for myself. So I've been bullied a lot for being LGBTQ, being loved. I've been bullied by a lot of for because some people who don't have something and they see it in others will try to destroy it in others. So I've recognized that. I get bullied for being loved, being openly gay and loved and accepted by straight people, gay people. Will look at me and say, "You're not one of us. You don't get our story because we're not loved because we're gay. You were loved. You grew up in a loving home." That ends up being a struggle too because then they get up and very microaggressive towards me at times. And so I've always had to advocate for myself on everything. And so I guess my voice comes from seeing and watching my grandma Sarah Shug advocate. Me and my sister would go with her when they would go to meetings and stuff like that. And Leo and all my family and council, seeing them advocate for people. So I think through osmosis, just being around. And I think it's also seeing the women in my family who often didn't advocate and were too loving and too giving got me annoyed when people would pillage and take too much um, and exploit their love and their kindness. So I'd have to speak up. Um, and I think um, just having been bullied all my life and then having to advocate for myself has kind of like honed my skills of advocacy and then also being pressured in society and then being basically thrown into the wolves and having to land on my feet in media and advocacy because that and then just really perfected my skills over the years and it's basically just strategizing and learning people and human behavior and finding ways and then always educating myself And I don't know how I've been able to cultivate lots of really influential people around me all my whole life. But it doesn't translate into wealth, by the way. It's a wealth of knowledge and networks.
Networks. I like how you're saying, everything you're saying is, you're a collaborator, partner,
Yeah.
networks, pools of people, like excellent talk,
Yeah,
thank you
I
so
find
much.
if I ramble, it's better. It can take any. I find it like a very open book, and at a point in my life where I'm like, I might as well just